This is the compositing setup for the very last shot of the film movie thing. I'm going to render it through once just to see what all the things are, because I don't think I named them quite correctly. We can take a look at the 3D view in the meantime. I'll show you. I have all of the goof fence set up here. Am I still in camera mode? Is that why it's weird? And I also have these things, which I'm having trouble getting over to. And these are just used to cast shadows, or to distort the shadows rather, because the sun's coming from this direction, the lamp is over here, and then in the shot there's cabbages or something right here, some kind of leafy stuff, and the shadows would just be hitting this plane and then superimposing over the original image, and it looks weird because it's not leafy. So these are just here to disrupt the shadows before I composite them in. And that's all that's going on in the 3D view. So I'm going to come back over here and we can see the final composited thing. There's not much overlap to speak of with the masking, but I'll still show you how I have the nodes set up, because that's hopefully interesting. I'm going to turn the backdrop off for the moment, and then we'll maximize this. So starting over here, I have a render layer that, let me take a look at it and actually see what it is. That says background, and then what's this one? The foreground. It looks like this one just has shadows. See, I'm actually not the best person to ask about this. Okay, so foreground is just the fence itself. Actually, maybe I'll turn backdrop on and actually use the viewer nodes appropriately. So let's take a look at it. So okay, so that looks like just black background, and it does shadow itself. And then up here, this image, which I didn't even use the image from, so this must just be shadows. Yeah, that's it. So I have an alpha channel and the shadow, so this should really be named shadow. This is what I meant by I didn't name them correctly. So I take the alpha channel and invert it to say the opposite of what isn't showing up, the opposite of where the current alpha is. That's what I want you to use for this value. And I'm going to take the shadow and feed it in here, add them together. So that gives me just the shadows, not even the actual fence itself, but just the shadows that are cast by the fence and onto the fence, if I remember correctly. And then this color balances the shadows, so I can say, alright, the dark should come up a little bit, the shadows look too dark. Let me move that to show you. Oh, I'm on the viewer node somewhere completely different, so if I take a look here, yeah, that's what I was talking about, just the shadows, and then if I bring them up, then they don't look so black. And I also set it to be a little bit blue because the sky itself is blue, and it causes a blue shadows. That if I look at the original footage, that's what I saw. And then I feed that into a blur node just to say, you know, it looks too sharp and computery, so I'm gonna blur it a little bit. And then down here, this is the actual fence itself being rendered out, not just the shadows. And then I blur that up here, and then I multiply that by the shadows. And multiplying darkens by whichever one. So I'm taking the actual fence and darkening it by the factor of the shadows. And then down here, this is the mask of, let me take a look and make sure I know what it is. This is my mask, masking out my body in the watering can. And then I invert it just to get what I wanted. I realized I could do that without using the compositor after the fact, so I just used an invert node. I could have just done it this way, done it all in one step. And then I feed this inverted mask into the minimum. Okay, so I take the minimum of this mask and the render layer, which gives me a result like this. The important part is right here. You can barely even tell. But the difference between, let me show you what I have and this, it cuts off that little part. So it's saying what part of the image is the fence but is not obscured by me. That's what's coming out of this minimum node. And then that gets fed into the alpha over. And this alpha over is what decides between this image, that we got to earlier, this image is everything that we want the fence to look like. Whoops, I put that in the wrong thing. So I'm starting to get confusing, I think. This alpha over is really the key thing. The alpha over is deciding what pixels to use from the final render of the fence, shadows and all, which is represented here. It's hard to actually show it well because they all cross. But remember, we blurred the shadows, we blurred the fence, we multiplied them together, and then it feeds into this image. And then this image up here is mostly the original footage that I took. It's this picture with a few changes. First, we feed it into a scale node just to make it fit the render size. That's what this is set to, render size. And then I also multiply it by, see, what are the factors here? I'm multiplying this by the shadows that have been blurred with a factor of, the factor is taking an input from all the way down here, which is the inverse of myself. So what this node is doing, to simplify, is it's taking the original footage and multiplying it by the shadows from the fence, which I disconnected this somewhere in my talking, which means that it's darkening the original image to add in the shadows. It's actually called multiplication. If you're adding these pixel values, it gets brighter. So multiplication is the thing to use for shadows in general. And so then we end up with the original footage but with shadows on the ground. That's what comes out of this multiply node. And so I tried to make it match my shadow as closely as I could. They still look too dark, and I think that's because I just messed with it a little bit. So if I bring that up, you can see it starts to look a little better. And then I could also blur it by more if I wanted blurrier shadows, a little bit more realistic. And so as I was saying, this alpha node over here takes the background image with shadows added. I wish I could just label these background with shadows or something. And it also takes in, let's see, what's coming in from this multiply node. What's the other thing? It also takes in the fence with shadows added, and then the factor for which pixels to use for which is this mask that says the fence minus me. Remember, we put that together. And then the final image is, as you see over here, it's everything that was shot with the camera, plus shadows, plus a fence, plus shadows on the fence, so that it all comes together and looks realistic.